Okay, I'm gonna let's let this go for like 10 seconds and I'm gonna give you the 30-second countdown, okay?
Thank you. Hello and welcome to Tika Talks today, coming to you from Central New Jersey Network TV. So we are live today, and I have a very, very special guest, and we are going to be talking about live events, live virtual events. And virtual events are here to stay. And I have the expert that I'm going to be discussing this with today. So let's welcome Blue Melnick. Thank you, Blue. Hi.
Hey, Sabrina. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here. It's going to be
Yeah,
awesome.
thank you. So I just wanted to give you guys a little bit about Blue and who Blue, what Blue does. Blue joined his wife, Bari Baumgardner, at Sage Event 11 years ago with more than 8 years experience running his family sales and marketing company. He was the perfect complement to Barry's sales is service approach. He added um, expertise in the audio, visual, and technical areas. When the pandemic forced a pivot in March 2020, it was Blue who quickly launched a tech platform to harness the power of Zoom to create immersive, interactive, virtual live events that work for 5, 50, 500, or even 50,000 people. As the creator of Obvio, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, the key to his success is approaching every virtual event from the perspective of the host first, the audience second, and designing events that are not just another Zoom meeting. No, we don't do that. And the key is integrating tech strategy, enrollment strategy, and also high tech, but high touch as well. His unique approach to envisioning how virtual events could outperform their in person counterpart led to 98 million plus virtual viewer minutes. That's phenomenal. And 175 million in revenue in just 2020. So I'm really excited to learn more about all of this, Blue. So welcome to Tika Talks.
Well, thanks for having me, Sabrina. I almost feel like there's nothing more to say. That introduction may be a little too wordy. I have to think about that one. Doesn't leave me with anything to share.
Oh, you are a brilliant, brilliant person, and I've learned so much from you and Barry in this virtual event space. So tell us a little bit about how what made you guys pivot from the in-person. Obviously it's the pandemic, but how did that idea of going virtual sort of came
Happen.
about?
Yeah, great question. So, I think much like everybody else in the event space, um, we had a pretty significant event take place here in the United States on March 15th of 2020, that was really when I would say people started to take the pandemic really seriously. A national emergency was declared. Some states had already started to limit gatherings as a result of COVID. But once the national emergency was declared, at that point, things just kind of became a lot more real. And prior to that, Barry and I ran an in person event production company where we did planning and strategy for our clients. And it had been in business since 2004. And things were going well. But when this happened, we really, much like the rest of the the industry had two choices. We could either furlough our team, which is really just a fancy word for laying them off, and become, a consultancy, or really just kind of curl up into a corner and wait until the pandemic passed. And of course, had we done that, I'm not sure that we'd be having this conversation. The other possibility was to try and figure things out. And when the pandemic, really was, I guess, declared real in the United States, um, we didn't have a lot of time to pivot. And I had what I often refer to as a shower moment. I don't know about you, but I get really good ideas in the shower. I don't know why, it just happens. I've often thought about putting like a whiteboard in the shower where I can make notes. But I got out of the shower, and we'd been thinking about how we could potentially do virtual. And the challenge that we had with it was we had done live streams of our live events previously. And the style of live event that we produce is what I would call an enrollment event, where it's something where people come to the event, they get some amazing value, but there's always a next step, right? You can join a coaching program, a mastermind, or, join a membership and be part of a community for an extended period of time beyond those 3 days. Essentially, take the experience you just had and extend it. And every time we had done that virtually through the power of a live stream, it just didn't convert the same way in person did. So we knew we had to do something different. And Bari and I had been talking about coming at this from the approach of the host, making sure that the host feels as though they can show up and perform. Because if they don't feel like they can show up on stage and deliver amazing value and connect with their audience, then it's just going to be like a webinar. So I got out of the shower and I drew something. This is not the original. I kind of wish it was. I don't have the original anymore. But I drew something that kind of looked like this. And Bari was like, "What is that?" And you may be thinking the same thing. Well, what this was I said to Bari, what if on stage, like we built out a stage, and on that stage, our host could actually see a bunch of televisions. And on each of those televisions, we were able to display attendees so that they could actually see, and then more importantly, hear and interact with those attendees. And she loved the idea, and I loved the idea. And I gave our audiovisual partner a call, and he was very much in the same boat that I had been in, right? At this point, it's probably March 20th or so. And, in those 5 days, the majority of our events up until September had canceled. And he was experiencing the exact same thing. For us, it was live event planning and strategy. And for him, it was production. And he was thinking the same thing. What do I do with my team? And I said, well, before you furlough your team, what if I can get one of our clients who just had an event canceled, try to do this? You've got a warehouse, you've got a lot of gear. What if we try and put this together there? And he said, I love the idea. Let's do it. So I called our host who had their event canceled April 3rd through the 5th. It was going to be in Indianapolis, and it was going to be for 300 people. And I said, I have an idea. You have these 3 days blocked. You already have 300 people who have purchased tickets. What if we were to deliver them something virtual? And I kind of laid out the concept to him. And I said, listen, I'm not just doing this to try and charge you more. I mean, you haven't paid for the full event. We won't charge you anything. If it works, then we can come up with some sort of revenue share agreement where we would get paid essentially the same amount that we would have got paid had we done the event, and you make money. And if it doesn't work, then, we wipe our hands of it. You don't pay anything. We don't make any money. It's all good. He agreed, which I will forever be grateful to Dylan for that. And he converted his event to virtual. He announced it to his audience. His attendance went from 300 to 1,200, which is pretty cool. And then, a couple of weeks later, we actually put the event together. Previously, this event generated a total of about $600,000 in gross revenue. This year, or at that time, that year, April 3rd through the 5th of 2020, which is less than 3 weeks from when the national emergency was declared, he generated $720,000. So a 20% increase in revenue. What was really interesting, though, was the fact that his expenses were cut in half. So his profit on the event more than doubled. So even though his revenue only went up by 20%, his profit went up by 100%, which is pretty awesome. And that just led to us thinking, you know what, I think we've got something here. And, we took what we'd done with that client, called the next one, who had an event a couple weeks later, and said, hey, we just did this thing. You don't have an event right now and you're trying to figure out what to do. I think we could make this happen. Are you interested? And essentially that just snowballed for us. And we did it so quickly that we wound up essentially, to a certain extent, being the leaders in this particular field anyway, from a virtual event perspective. And now you've probably seen virtual event sets that we're either responsible for in the background or that were in many ways inspired by the work that we did, early on in 2020. So yeah, that's a little bit about how we got here. I hope that wasn't too much.
Oh, no, that was perfect because it's really great to give our audience a background of how this all came about and what some of the results from it, because it's definitely widened the reach.
Yeah.
Because now people can attend from all over the world and still experience that. So tell me why you're convinced that virtual events are here to stay. Because I am too, but I'd like our audience to have that perspective.
Yeah. So, it's interesting. I've been having a conversation about whether or not virtual events are here to stay, or, here in the United States anyway, there's the in-person event market is slowly coming back. It's nowhere near where it was in pre-pandemic times, but it's definitely starting to come back. You're starting to hear of events that are taking place and people who are gathering and so on and so forth. And every single day, I feel like I'm having a conversation where somebody asks me, are virtual events dead? Are they going to go away? And I have my feeling on it, but more importantly, I have statistics to share with you. So far this year, we've done 5 virtual events just in 2022. And at this point, almost 2 years since that first virtual event that we produced, we're starting to get to the point where the virtual events that we're producing now, it's the second or third time that the event has taken place. And I'll tell you that every single one of the events that we've produced thus far this year has generated more revenue than the previous virtual events for that client, for the exact same thing, for the exact same audience. And in most cases has had more attendees as well. So more attendees, more revenue. In my mind, those are the two things that really matter the most, because attendees mean impact and revenue mean income. And if you can continue to have more income and more impact with your events, then I don't think they're going anywhere. And then looking forward to the events that we have coming up over the course of the next 2 months or so, I can tell you that every single one of them is targeting and tracking to be ahead of the most recent virtual event that they produced in terms of attendees. We have an event coming up this weekend that's a one-day event for about 30,000 people. We have an event in a couple of weeks where the previous high was about 20 to 25,000 people, and it's actually already ahead of that.
Wow.
So yeah, I don't think virtual events are going anywhere. And I think where it comes down to is I don't think live events, in-person events, are dead either. I do think there's a place for them, and I do think people will still want to gather. But for clients where the reason that they're doing an event is to have impact on their audience and to generate revenue, to have income, when you can have more impact and more income from virtual than you can from in-person, why would you do in-person? And it really comes down to one thing, and this isn't a popular thing to say, especially to event hosts, but for the most part, the event hosts who are going back to in person are doing so because of ego. They're not doing it for impact, right? Because they can have a greater impact doing it virtually. They expand their audience, right? Because what has happened with virtual over the course of the last couple of years is we used to say that with the internet, you have a global audience. But when it came to live in-person events, you didn't. You had a regional audience. It may have been national, right? But in many cases was actually regional at the state level, or maybe people traveled to you from within a couple of states here in the United States. But it was rarely national or global. With virtual events, you have a global audience. We have events regularly that have people from all over the world, even though we are still running our events in Eastern time, right? Starting at 11 in the morning, going till about 7, 8 o'clock at night. We have people who join us from Australia, from New Zealand, from Asia, from India, from Europe, from South America, although that's the same time zone, from really all over the world. So if you can have a greater impact by going virtual, and your costs as a result of going with virtual are still significantly lower, which means your income is significantly higher, there's only one reason left, right? Which is how it makes me feel as the host to see people in person. So I know that's not necessarily a popular statement, but I do think it's the reality.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that one. Also, it's so much more work. I mean, there's a lot of work on the virtual side as well.
Yeah.
It's not just a Zoom meeting, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but it is a lot more work. And I know from just my experience from the first event that you guys did for your audience, I have formed a community that's global. And the networking at an in-person event is basically get some business cards, say hello, and maybe talk to them, on LinkedIn or something like that. What I have to say, the community that I was able to form, it's so much stronger. The bond is so much stronger, and the friendships are just incredible. I'm very surprised. I've never met some of these people, but we have a great time every Friday afternoon on Tika Talks, and that's all really thanks to you and Bari for showing us that that's possible. So I want to ask you, what is the biggest misconception about a virtual live event, especially over Zoom?
Yeah, for sure. Well, first off, a couple of things. You said something interesting, which is when you were talking about Tika Talks and the global audience and the fact that you've never met some of these people. And I would argue that you have, because the relationships that we build through these interactive conversations, like the one that you and I are having right now, are really strong. I'll tell you, I have had the opportunity over the course of the last year to meet a couple of people who were initially virtual friends.
Mm-hmm.
And, they were in our community. We had not ever met in person, but the feeling that I had, right, how it made me feel when I met them in person was not that I was meeting somebody new for the first time. It was that I was seeing an old friend. So I think as people start to interact with people who they met during the pandemic and they've only ever talked to on, Zoom or on StreamYard or whatever, if they're having conversations like the one that you and I are having, I'm not talking about live streams, right? I'm not talking about a one-way broadcast. But if they've had conversations with them on Zoom or Team or any one of those interactive platforms, you'll find that when you meet those people in person, it's like seeing an old friend. It's not like you're meeting them for the first time. So that's just one statement, and probably also the biggest misconception. The other misconception is that a virtual event is just a live stream or a one-way broadcast. There's a lot of amazing platforms out there that do a lot of great things in terms of the environment that they create, right? One that comes to mind is VFairs. Another one that comes to mind is Verbella. And there's another one that I'm forgetting, but essentially they have a tendency to create these 3D virtual environments that look like a conference, or they look like a 3D world. The problem with them is that's just how you click around and interact with them. What then winds up happening is what I watch as the attendee is essentially no better than a live stream inside of that world. I can't ask the host a question. The host can't talk directly with me. We can't have a conversation back and forth. And for me, that's a major miss when it comes to what some people are doing with virtual events. One of the reasons that we've had the success that we've had with our virtual events is the ability for the host and the participants to interact not via chat, but actually talk. And that's why we leverage the power of Zoom rather than, one of these other, what I would call gimmicky platforms that provide a pretty neat skin over top of what is essentially a live stream. And as a result of having these real experiences, these experiences where oftentimes we say people at a virtual event of ours, everybody has a front row seat, which is a big difference from what you had in person, right? In person, only the people in the front have a front row seat.
Right.
And as the host, I can look up and I can see, like when I'm looking at a stage that kind of looks like this piece of paper, I'm seeing, 4, 5, 6, 700 people and their names. So I can actually just look up, see your face and say, Sabrina, it looks like you have a question. Or you may raise your hand and say, I've got a question, right? It's actually one of the things that we do in our virtual events. We don't use some of the technical stuff inside of Zoom. Like we don't often use the raise hand button. If you have a question, we just say, raise your hand because we can see you.
Right.
Because I want it to be a physical experience. I want them to actually respond and feel as though it's an in-person event. Because in so many ways, it is.
Yeah, I completely agree with that feeling of, even though you haven't met them and you've only met online, but you've had a two-way conversation, that you do feel like you're meeting an old friend. So I should say, even though I haven't met them in person, I still have a lot of friends that I made virtually. So thanks to you and Bari. I think one of the do you feel that one of the big mistakes or the big misconception is also that people think that a live event, especially if it's over Zoom, is just another Zoom meeting and don't understand the complexities that go into planning something like that in order to have a more engaging event?
For sure. And I'll tell you, one of the things, there's a common term that was, I believe, coined by, let's say it was somebody at Stanford. Like an article was written about a year ago by one of I believe it was the University of Stanford. And they coined the phrase Zoom fatigue. And there's a lot of people who are like, there's so much Zoom fatigue out there. I don't want to do another Zoom meeting. The thing that article didn't talk about was they were using Zoom as a descriptor for a type of meeting. They weren't actually talking about Zoom because they were, but they don't understand what the platform is. That's the problem. Zoom is quite simply a video delivery mechanism, right? It's no different in terms of the way it delivers video than Netflix or YouTube or Hulu or Facebook Live or any one of the video delivery mechanisms, with one exception: the video is two-way. So people don't have Zoom fatigue. They oftentimes have crappy video fatigue, right? So if you're sitting there and you are forced to see a host who is, maybe looking, there's a Zoom angle, right? There's that camera that sits at the top of a laptop that when you don't put any thought into it, it kind of looks up at you, right? Kind of almost looking up your nose, like make sure that you've blown your nose before you get on Zoom kind of thing. So there's a bad angle. Oftentimes there's bad lighting. Oftentimes there's bad sound. But when all of a sudden you put some production value into the platform, right? Zoom now becomes a video delivery mechanism that's no different than any of the others. And nobody's talking about Netflix fatigue, right? In fact, it's the opposite. Viewership in Netflix and YouTube and all of the online streaming platforms has skyrocketed during the pandemic, and nobody's getting bored of that. Why? Because they provide great content. So if you provide great content and you put some thought into the video production element of what you're doing, Zoom fatigue doesn't exist. It's not real. It's just crappy video fatigue that we all have.
I agree. I agree. I also add another one to that Zoom fatigue with crappy video is really crappy design.
Yeah,
Crappy design of your run of show.
for sure.
And really not understanding transitions from one piece to the other, because I see sometimes that people do a Zoom where it's a lot of panel type of discussion, not the enrollment type, but a lot of panel discussion. And it really gets boring because they don't understand how to engage the audience. And you might as well just be looking at a video because I'm sitting here and I'm not engaged.
Yeah.
So I feel like all of those pieces is really, really critical to having a successful event. So
Yeah, 100%. And that you were talking about one of the misconceptions. It's also one of the mistakes that people make when they do virtual events. And if you've ever been to a virtual event that didn't feel good, this probably happened. They don't treat it like a live event. They treat it like a webinar that is just extended, right? And that's where those panel discussions come in. That's where a lot of like slide sharing comes in, where you see a tiny version of the person's face, and then it's nothing but PowerPoint slides that are really oftentimes bad PowerPoint slides. And of course, that's not engaging. That's not interesting. So there are definitely some things that you have to do to keep it visually appealing to the audience member, so it doesn't feel like Zoom, even though you're inside of Zoom, right? It's not uncommon for our clients when they're doing their marketing to actually say in their marketing, this isn't just another Zoom meeting, right? Even though they then send out a link that takes the attendee into Zoom. It doesn't matter, because once they get in there, now they're, when kind of like you did when we started this recording, there's a countdown timer when we start. There's music playing. When the host takes the stage, they're not just sitting there at a desk. They're standing on a stage. They're walking back and forth, because those TVs, those are 20 feet across. So as they're walking, they're kind of talking to a portion of their audience the same way a speaker does when they're on a stage. So there's a lot of things that happen in a well-produced virtual event that really make it feel like an in-person or experience. And if that is missing, then yeah, I could understand Zoom fatigue. But it really doesn't come down to Zoom.
yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree, because I've experienced a lot of the there's events, the live virtual events that you and Barry have produced. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is Obvio.
Wow.
And, I look at Obvio as your digital venue. So tell us a little bit more about how that came about and what it's all about.
Sure. So when that first event that we produced back in April of 2020, we wanted to make sure that it wasn't just another Zoom meeting. We didn't want to have to send out Zoom invites to everybody. When they got the invite, we didn't even want them to see a Zoom link inside of the email invite. What we wanted to do was send everybody to a place, okay? And we called it a dashboard, but essentially a short-term membership site, right? So it was password protected for the event. And we wanted them to log in to the site, have resources available to them, such as, speaker bios, downloadable workbooks and worksheets, and ways to interact with the event, and have it be kind of a central hub for everything that's going on at the time of the event. And when we first did it, we built it on WordPress. And, we built a website. We had a few plugins to make it more like a membership site, even though it was just for the event itself. And then we sent people a link, not to Zoom, but to this website. And when they got to the website, there was a button on it that said join the main stage. And when they clicked on that button, of course, that's when they came into Zoom. And initially, having done that in WordPress, that worked for the event that we did. But as our events scaled up and got more complicated, we found that WordPress and how those interactions were taking place wasn't powerful enough to be able to manage and handle the complexity that we wanted to create. So we started working on a platform that allow you to create a dashboard for your event that's automatically tied into Zoom, and that also secures Zoom. Because for those of us that are selling event tickets, one of the downsides to Zoom is it's not terribly secure, right? If I get into a Zoom meeting, I can pretty much click on the little green shield, or sometimes it's orange, but the top left of your Zoom window, there's a little button. You click on that and you see, oh, I can download the meeting link and passcode and share it with my friends. Well, I don't want that as an event host, especially if I'm selling tickets. So we were able to tie into Zoom, secure Zoom meetings, and make an easy way for people to create their event, pick a template for their dashboard, customize the dashboard to whatever they want it to be, and give people a place to come into Zoom nice and easily. You can upload resources, you can create forms and exercises and surveys. You can have interaction in the form of an emoji wall, which I'm happy to get into if you want, but also give attendees the ability to share photos of what's taking place for them, and then take those photos and make them displayed for the attendees, right? So there's a little bit of interactivity. We included gamification in the platform. So as you take action on the dashboard, you get points. Those points are associated with a leaderboard. And then from stage, we use that leaderboard to reward attendees who are actually taking action. So all of that, that technology is coupled with good high touch, right? Like a really decent program at a glance or run of show, like you said. So it's not just, oh, you got points, but you got points and we're going to use them in this way, right? It's not all that much different. Every single one of us has been to an event at some point where at the start of a session, the MC comes out, they have a fishbowl, and they pull out a raffle ticket and they give a name, right? Or they give a number. And you look inside of your reg bag and you have a couple of raffle tickets and you're looking to see if you match. And if you match, then you get a thing, right? Maybe they give you an iPhone or an iPad, or, maybe they just give you a cup of coffee, whatever. That's essentially gamifying a specific action that we want the attendees to take. And the action that we want them to take is to show up on time. So we use things like that through the gamification engine that's built into Obvio. Obvio is a long, a long story. It's a long project that we've been working on, but essentially it launched officially to a set of beta users in March of 2021. And since then, we've had over 1,200 events that have been hosted on the platform.
Wow.
And we have had over 750,000 attendees go through the platform. So, we continue to make changes to it on a regular basis, continue to upgrade it. And I'm sure at some point in the not so distant future, we will have it come out of beta and be a publicly accessible tool. But that's essentially a little bit about Obvio.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really awesome. So I know that Sage Event is going to be doing another virtual event on how to do virtual events. Can you tell me a little bit more about when that's coming up, and just a little overview of, just so our audience, in case, hey, I encourage everybody to find out more about it, which I'll put a link in this stream later on
Yes.
as to how to get there. So.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So we have an event coming up. It's called the Virtual Event on Virtual Events. We are not terribly good marketers, or if we were, we would have had a far better name.
I love the name.
Yeah. But we're event people first. and marketers second. Although I do wish that wasn't the case. Sadly, it is. That event is coming up at the end of March. It's 3 days. And over the course of those 3 days, you're going to learn how to produce your own virtual event. To your point, whether it's for 5 people, for 50, for 500 or 5,000 or more, the bottom line is we want to make sure that that people can do this themselves, because the reality is you actually don't need a ton of technology to make virtual events happen. And, we talked about earlier making sure that you have decent video, but that doesn't need a tremendous amount to actually make a massive difference in how you look, how your attendees feel when they see you. So that's going to be part of it. I'll tell you, over the course of the 3 days, day one, we teach strategize. So how do you take everything that you love about in-person events and make it virtual? How do you, figure out what the technology is that you're going to use for your virtual events? How do you figure out what the big picture vision is for your virtual events? Day two is all about monetize, right? That's the thing that people really love. How do I make money from my virtual events? We talk about sponsorship, we talk about keynote speakers, we talk about filling your live events, right? Because that's oftentimes one of the things that's most important. But not just filling your live events, but filling them with the right fit audience members, right? Somebody who knows, likes, and trusts you and wants to learn more from you. And then day three, we call it actualize, but essentially it's how do you take everything that you planned on day one and day two and make it real? How do you actually put your plan into action? So that's that's the short version. It is January 31st to April 2nd, so not terribly far from now.
You mean March?
Yes, sorry. Yeah, you're right. March 31st to April 2nd. It's cool. Been a long day. And if you guys would like to join us, you can. You can go to pbsage.com. So it's powered by, but I oftentimes say peanut butter, so people know what it is specifically. It's pbsage.com /Tika. That will get you a special price point. It's usually it's going to be $197 to attend, but you can come for $97.
Cool. Okay, that's awesome. I'll put that in the chat. I'll remember that. And so what am I forgetting to ask you that's really important, critical, or did we cover it all?
Well, I mean, this is one of those topics that I, could talk about for 3 days, which is why we're hosting a live event. But I do think the biggest thing to remember is that the pandemic has not been fun, right? It has been, I think, on many levels, it would not be unrealistic or unreasonable to call it a human tragedy. But from a live event perspective, it's actually been really interesting, because in the last 2 years, live events have progressed way more than they have in the past 2,000 years. Because if you think about it, in-person events were generally the same, right? Maybe now we have a screen up, but previously what took place? You had somebody who was speaking, and then people would gather at the location that person was speaking. They would learn from that person and choose to either continue to follow that person or move on with their daily lives. And for the most part, that was the format. Like for 2,000 years or longer, that has been the format of live events. But over the course of the last 2 years, there's been this democratization of live events because you no longer need a venue, right? And as a result of no longer needing a venue, from the host perspective, it's significantly less expensive to produce an event where people can gather and learn from you. And from the attendees' perspective, it's significantly less expensive and easier to reach more people who are teaching cooler stuff than just the folks in your backyard. Because for those people that I was talking about who come to our events from Australia, from New Zealand, from Asia, from India, from Africa, from Europe, those people or South America, those people no longer have to get on a plane to come to us. They no longer then, once they land on that plane, need to go through customs and then get into an Uber and then go to a hotel or an Airbnb and eat, not great food and get crammed into a hotel ballroom just to be able to interact. Those people can now interact with us and learn from us from the comfort of their own home without ever having to leave their family, right? Without having to spend a dime on transportation. So what used to be, a $97 event ticket that then needed $1,500, $1,600 in travel expenses has translated into a $97 event ticket, and that's it. So both from the host perspective and from the attendees perspective, virtual has really democratized the accessibility of live events. It is so much easier for all of us to host them and to attend them. And I think as a result of that, in combination with greater reach and greater impact, virtual events are not only here to stay, but I think in the not so distant future, you'll see that they will vastly outnumber and outperform in-person events. And I say that knowing that, of course, over the course of the last couple of years, they're already doing that. But as the world opens up and, let's just say everything's on even footing and we can all gather together and, as the pandemic slowly wanes, hopefully, I think even on even footing, right, where you can go to either one without any restrictions and without any limitations, I think you'll see that virtual events vastly outperform their in-person counterparts.
That is awesome. I believe it. I've seen it. And I'm encouraging people that are listening or watching this live stream to actually, think about doing a live event, a live virtual event for your business, because it is extremely successful once it's planned out properly, and it's not just a webinar. It's, there's interaction and fun, gamification. There's lots of different things, and like Blue says, you don't have to have a lot of fancy technology or fancy equipment to actually make something happen. So we thank you, Blue, so much for your time. Thank you again. I'm grateful for you sharing your wisdom and your experience, and hoping that the audience will really attend this next TVE at the end of March that you guys are putting on, so they can also learn and expand their reach. So thank you again for gracing me with your time.
Oh, you're awesome, Tika. Thank you very much for having me. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you and, of course, your audience. And I'm looking forward to what the future brings for virtual events as we continue to broaden their reach, broaden their horizon, and broaden their impact.
Thank you. Thank you again. Okay, that's it for Tika Talks for now. Bye for now.
Okay.